Hello everybody, it's me, Diamond Miner Studios, and it's time for yet another game review. Last time, I took an in-depth look at Sonic Adventure and explained why I think it was a flawed but still successful 3D transition for the Sonic series. By now, I'm pretty sure you're aware of how much I love this franchise. If I hadn't made it crystal clear already, these games feature exciting, fast-paced gameplay, great controls, solid stage design that complements these things, gorgeous visuals, awesome music, the list goes on. Sonic may not be my favorite game franchise of all time. I'd say Mario still holds that title, but it sure as hell is one of my favorites. However, as much as I enjoyed most of the games in the franchise, like I said, most, there is one game that stands over and above all the rest for me. I like many of the Sonic games, especially 3 and Knuckles, but even that game doesn't quite top my true favorite in the series. Of course, I'm referring to the subject of today's review, Sonic Adventure 2.
Hey, that rhymed, holy sh!
This is it. This game is one of the reasons I wanted to create reviews in the first place, alongside Super Mario Sunshine. I wanted to create an in-depth review of SA2 for the longest time, and with my new capture card, now's my chance. If you watch my past videos, then you would know I consistently toss praise in this game's direction, no matter what video game related video it is. My collection showcases, my other game reviews, whenever the topic of SA2 comes up, I constantly praise the game to high heavens. It's easily one of my favorite video games of all time, and I'm prepared to tell you why in extreme detail. Without further ado, let's get right into this. Like last time, I'm going to start with a history lesson to give some context and background information. This is going to be a bit lengthy, so if you don't care about the history and just want to get right into the review, then feel free to skip to this timestamp on screen. You still here? Alright, I warned you. Our story begins in 1999. Following the release and relative financial success of Sonic Adventure on the Dreamcast, Sonic Team and Sega wanted to follow up on it with a sequel. Development on this new entry was handled by Sonic Team USA, who were based in San Francisco, California. The game's aesthetics were heavily influenced by this area and several other locations from the US, including Yosemite National Park. The development team said that they wanted SA2 to have, quote, more of an American flavor than the first adventure game. The 10th anniversary of the Blue Blur was also quickly approaching, and as a result, the team set out to create the biggest, most ambitious, most impressive Sonic entry to date. The development team included such people as Takashi Iizuka and Yuji Naka, who intended to create a more action-oriented game than the slower-paced, more story-driven, and occasionally drab Adventure 1. They also trimmed much of the fat from that game, including what they deemed to be unnecessary side content, and were able to harness the power of the Dreamcast to a much greater degree than before due to a greater experience with the hardware. What resulted is an incredibly fast-paced game with a heavy emphasis on action. The game was first shown off in a trailer at E3 2000, which was later uploaded to the official Sonic Team website. When it was demonstrated, fans of the series were incredibly excited, but they were reportedly disappointed about one thing. At this time, Sonic Adventure 2 was structured much differently than the final game we know today. Initially, it was supposed to play more like the first adventure, with 3 separate campaigns where you played as Sonic, Knuckles, and Eggman. When it was shown off, fans were supposedly upset that Tails wasn't playable in the new game, so following that showcase, a massive restructure of the game occurred. By the time of release in 2001, a playable Tails was introduced, along with 2 new characters, who were in the game but originally not playable, Shadow the Hedgehog and Ridge the Bat. The campaigns were also organized into 2 separate stories where you alternate between characters. The game was released on June 23, 2001 worldwide, the 10th anniversary date of the series. Unfortunately, the Sega Dreamcast was not doing so well at the time, as I went into in the last review. The Sony PlayStation 2 had just been released in 2000, and the next Nintendo console was on its way. Additionally, Microsoft was about to enter the gaming industry with its own console, just as Sony had done in the previous generation. To put this in perspective, the Dreamcast sold 9 million units in its entire lifespan, whereas the PS2 sold 19 million units in 2001 alone. Ouch. As a result, the Dreamcast was discontinued the same year SA2 released, making it one of the last first-party Dreamcast games. The game was later re-released on the Nintendo Gamecube under the moniker Sonic Adventure 2 Battle in early 2002, and again on PlayStation Network, Xbox Live Arcade, and Steam in 2012. Upon its initial 2001 Dreamcast release, the game was incredibly well received. Hell, even IGN gave it a score of 9 out of 10. Considering the blatant hate boner that horrendous website has for Sonic, that's pretty impressive. The Gamecube version received slightly more mixed reviews, but was still overall well received. However, as the years went on, and following the 2012 HD release, people tended to get more critical of SA2 as a whole and questioned it much more than they had previously. And that's more or less the status quo as of today. Following the change in fans' perspectives, the debate surrounding SA2 continues on, and it remains a relatively polarizing subject in the Sonic community, and the gaming community at large, even more so than the first game. Some people absolutely love SA2 and consider it one of the best Sonic games ever made, while others strongly dislike it and claim that people only enjoy it because of nostalgia. Personally, I'm not entirely sure what caused this huge mitotic separation of perspectives following the HD re-release of the game, much like the first Sonic Adventure. I do have a bit of a theory though, so bear with me here. I think it's a combination of 2 things. One, half a decade of mixed to poor quality 3D Sonic releases, and 2, a general nostalgia boom for the old 2D consoles. Among that huge movement was the Sega Genesis, and of course the first 4 2D Sonic games. It became commonplace to consider those the absolute peak of the franchise, and that anything released after them wasn't worth a damn. Combine this with the double-decker train wreck from 2006, and you've got a recipe for nostalgic people screeching for the return of the old formula, as well as dismissing the quality of all 3D Sonic games, including SA2. As I said last time, this isn't a concrete fact, but it is my best guess. Now, I want to make something perfectly clear. The purpose of this review is not to attack those who dislike SA2 or anything like that. We all like or dislike games we do for our own reasons, so it's not my intention to shame you if you disagree with me. I'm also not making these reviews to shit all over the 2D games. I love my fair share of side-scrollers, including Mario, Donkey Kong Country, and yes, even the classic Sonic games, among many, many others. The point of this review then is to give my personal thoughts on Sonic Adventure 2, and to offer a critical defense of the game as a whole. I personally love the game to such a degree that's difficult to quantify, but I understand and respect that not everyone will agree with me. I also recognize that SA2 is not a perfect game by any means, and trust me, I will be discussing any and all gripes I have with it. I'll also be going over version differences when relevant, and we'll be using footage from all 3 versions of the game interchangeably. With that said, this is my review of Sonic Adventure 2. Sit back, grab something to munch on, and enjoy. Let's kick this review off by talking about the story. I will admit the story is not my biggest interest in a video game, and it's probably the subject I apply the least critical weight to, in platformers at least. As such, I like to keep this plot synopsis short and sweet, and I'll avoid discussing significant spoilers, at least for now. Sonic Adventure 2 isn't a direct follow-up to Sonic Adventure, but it does take place sometimes afterwards, as implied by several cutscenes. Our story begins on the heavily fortified prison island, based off of Alcatraz. Dr. Eggman has found his grandfather's diary, and after reading it a bit, he discovers something that may aid him in his quest to take over the world. He breaks into Prison Island, makes his way deep into the facilities, and unleashes a top-secret weapon, Shadow the Hedgehog, a black hedgehog and self-proclaimed ultimate life form. As a reward for setting him free, Shadow helps out Eggman and leads him to the mysterious space colony Ark. Upon reaching the abandoned space colony, Shadow introduces Eggman to its secret weapon, the Death Star-inspired laser called the Eclipse Cannon. All he needs to do is collect the 7 Chaos Emeralds to power it, and then he can unleash the cannon's power to take over the world. As they're discussing this, a bat named Rouge overhears their conversation and offers to help find the Chaos Emeralds as long as she gets to use Eggman's Emerald Radar. As the 3 attempt to gather the Chaos Emeralds, Shadow is spotted one night stealing one from the bank, and is mistaken for Sonic. As a result, Sonic is captured and locked up by Gun, the military forces that control Prison Island, but quickly gets freed by Tails and Amy. The trio soon discovers that Eggman's plans to take over the world, and together with Knuckles, who joins them following the scattering of the Master Emerald shards, they follow Eggman up to space to foil his scheme once again. By the end, it does get a bit more complicated, but still not by terribly much. In general, I find that this isn't too different from a classic Sonic plot. While it's much more in-depth than any of the stories in those games, it really does boil down to the usual Eggman's being a dick, go and stop him. The difference is in the new characters, Shadow and Rouge, who create a lot of intrigue regarding their origins and their ultimate intentions. Shadow especially does this well, and its mysterious nature leads to a lot of interesting questions that will leave you guessing. All in all, I think the story of Sonic Adventure 2 is surprisingly well done for a platforming game. I also find the character interactions immensely entertaining, with really fun moments.
Faker! Faker? I think you're the fake hedgehog around here. You're comparing yourself to me? Ha! You're not even good enough to be
I'll make you eat those words!
Deliciously hammy acting.
Having to come back isn't my idea of a vacation. How can you be sure your intelligence reports are correct? Why would the Chaos Emeralds be here on the island? Are you absolutely sure?
And incredible portrayals of the characters by their respective voice actors, especially Ryan Drummond as Sonic, and Dean Bristow, God rest his soul, as Eggman. I also find some of the plot points that are criticized to be much better than people give them credit for. Chief among them is the Sonic and Shadow mistaken for another point. By the way, am I the only one who noticed that Super Mario Sunshine uses this same plot device? I know, I already brought that up in my review of the game, but it bears repeating. I mean, a dark version of the main character causes the actual character to go to jail in both games, and they both came out around the same time. I mean, come on, that can't be a coincidence. But I digress. This plot point is consistently labeled as nonsensical since the thing is, many people fail to realize 2 things. 1, Shadow is running at high speeds with a Chaos Emerald at night, and 2, Shadow's quills have the exact same shape as Supersonic's. Considering the fact he was holding one of the emeralds, who the hell wouldn't assume this isn't some form of Sonic's they've never seen? I'd also like to add that many people have witnessed Supersonic fighting Perfect Chaos in the first adventure game. So again, it's not as much of a stretch as many will claim. In general, I find the story of SA2 to be incredibly entertaining and one of the best from the Sonic series. Not to mention the story is genuine above everything else. Like the last game, the story in SA2 feels like the writers were genuinely trying to immerse you in the game's world, unlike the cringeworthy, self-parodying schlock from the newer games. However, saying that alone would be ignoring many other important, less positive aspects of this story. I do overall enjoy the plot, both partially ironically and unironically, but I won't deny that it has its problems. For one, the presentation of the cutscenes is aged by quite a bit. Now, to be frank, the cutscenes in Sonic Adventure 2 are light years ahead of the first game. Instead of a bunch of boring, poorly paced, repetitive scenes of characters sitting around talking and using stock recycled animations, SA2 features much more dynamic and visually interesting cutscenes with motion capture and much more active scenes overall. With that said though, yeah, these cutscenes still look pretty dated. While better than the static looping animations from the first game, the mocap in SA2 can still look stiff, almost like the characters are suspended by puppet strings sometimes. Facial animations can also look strange. Again, they're way better than they were in SA1, but they still look outdated and aren't synced to the English dub. This can occasionally make it difficult to take the scenes seriously, but I'm certain that wasn't entirely the writer's intentions, so I can excuse it. Also, this was the quality standard of presentation at the time. Like I said in my Adventure 1 review, these games were following the standard of the time. Games like Star Fox 64, Mega Man X4, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and the original Resident Evil also came out around the same time, and had about the same quality of acting, if not worse.
Stop it! Don't open that door!
It wasn't until several months after SA2 when games like Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty, and the Sony platforming trio would absolutely obliterate both adventure titles. I'm not saying that SA1 and 2 don't have dated story presentation, because they absolutely do. I'm just wondering why people tend to treat titles like X4 or Resi 1 differently. A much bigger gripe I have with the cutscenes concerns the audio department. The sound mixing and dialogue pacing simply have some issues. The music is occasionally mixed much louder than the dialogue, which can make it difficult to make out.
This time, as well as the Chaos Emerald, I call on you to destroy these pests! Come out, my servant!
The Gamecube version is a little worse off in this regard, with music that's been turned up even louder.
This time, as well as the Chaos Emerald, I call on you to destroy these pests! Come out, my servant!
And it is a little better in the HD version, but still not great.
This time, as well as the Chaos Emerald, I call on you to destroy these pests! Come out, my servant!
Thankfully, the game has subtitles. Comic Sans. Quick side note, I actually wrote Comic Sans in my script in actual Comic Sans. I don't know why I did that. I'm actually that much of a fucking creep. Yeah, like I said, this presentation can use some improvements. Hell, there's even a typo in this one Dark Story cutscene, one that Sonic Team never bothered fixing. Okay then. The dialogue itself also has a tendency to overlap, so characters can interrupt one another from time to time. I'll admit though, I find this cut-off dialogue to be pretty funny, and it's not like it's unrealistic for people to cut each other off in the real world, so it doesn't really bother me. One unequivocal improvement over the first Sonic Adventure, however, is one simple addition. You can skip the cutscenes.
Praise be to the Lord, for he is our savior!
Seriously, you don't understand how tedious it was to be forced to sit through those repetitive, boring cutscenes in the Dreamcast version of SA1. You can even skip them in the Dreamcast version of SA2, so the replay value of that version isn't entirely demolished. I am aware that the re-releases of SA1 fixed this detrimental flaw as I went over in the last review, but the fact that SA2 had this basic feature from the get-go is a major plus. Unfortunately, you still can't skip the credits sequences, but there's at least only 3 of those now as opposed to 7. One more thing to touch on briefly is the version-specific visual differences between cutscenes, because yes, the re-releases on Gamecube and 7th Gen systems make some changes that ultimately lead to the cutscenes being worse off. Some changes are pretty minor and don't affect anything. For instance, the computer screen in the last cutscene of the Dark Story was changed to say warning instead of danger, like on Dreamcast. Okay then. However, most changes do detract from the presentation. For one, the lighting in the cutscenes has been made worse. This change isn't to the ridiculous degree that SADX screws up the lighting, but it's still noticeably worse here. That's not to mention the countless animation downgrades, like Amy being cross-eyed now and the many layering errors. The HD version also doesn't compensate for the change in aspect ratio, which sometimes leads to seeing things that you weren't meant to see, and some of its cutscenes are still in 4:3, which can get really distracting, although there is a mod to fix this. These, though, are still not the most egregious changes changes to the cutscenes. The most negative change they made actually comes from one specific scene. It's the one right before Rouge's last level, Mad Space. On Dreamcast, this cutscene is fine. When researching Project Shadow, Rouge gets a detector reading that the Master Emerald shards are nearby, which is what prompts her to go out and to look for them. On every subsequent re-release, this cutscene was inexplicably changed to replace the detector reading with a video feed of Sonic, Tails, and Amy, and that's what prompts Rouge to look for the shards. In other words, they changed a completely fine cutscene in a way that causes it to make no sense. Why the hell did they do this? Why were any of these changes made when everything was fine on Dreamcast? I have no idea. I don't know what drug Sonic Team was on when they made this change, but I certainly don't want any of it. With the plot talk finally done and dusted, it's time to move on to the visuals of SA2. Since it was one of the final big releases on the Dreamcast, it's unsurprisingly one of the most visually impressive and appealing games on the system. I've previously said that I thought Sonic Adventure was the best looking game from 1998 or 1999, and I stand by that. However, even though Adventure 1 was a decent looking launch title for the Dreamcast, Sonic Adventure 2 is a massive improvement in this department. I've already briefly talked about the animations, which are way better than last time. I mean, Eggman actually has a mouth this time around. Wow, what a concept, huh? The models themselves are way better looking, with a greater number of polygons, much more appealing colors and textures, and solid animations during gameplay. The environments especially are a huge step up, with more visually engaging and striking themes, higher quality textures, greater visual variety, and better constructed level geometry across the board. There's also a fair share of nice looking details, such as the addition of the lens flare effect when looking at the sky. In terms of art direction, SA2 is more or less the same as its predecessor. It goes for a combination of cartoony and realistic. Like I mentioned in the development history, the dev team wanted to space SA2 off of places in the US, and I'd say they pulled it off quite well. I love the art direction of these levels, and each one is quite memorable. Anyone who plays SA2 can remember locations such as Pumpkin Hill, Meadow Harbor, and the San Francisco-inspired City Escape, Radical Highway. In addition, every version of the game runs at a full 60 frames per second with minimal drops, which makes the visuals hold up much better than they would have otherwise, and works wonders for the smoothness of the game as a whole. And that's not to mention Big the Cat's many cameos in the stages, which is a really funny background detail. I mean, I'd rather have this than being forced to play as him, that's for sure. He'll even show up in a few cutscenes if you mash the A button. Anyways, the Gamecube version is more or less the same visually, with a few minor differences. In general, it looks pretty much the same outside of cutscenes. The lighting is somewhat less dynamic and the textures are lower resolution, but these things are hardly noticeable in motion. The most noteworthy visual change actually concerns the look of the menus, which have been completely redesigned. I don't mind the look of the Dreamcast title screen and menus, but I personally prefer how the Gamecube one looks. Also, and because I have no better place to mention this, the load times on Gamecube are much quicker than on Dreamcast, which I do appreciate. The Dreamcast loading times aren't terrible, unlike certain other games, but any reduction to load times regardless of the game is a plus in my book. However, the Gamecube version removes most of Big the Cat's stage cameos. The HD version is the most different of the two re-releases because it's, well, in HD now. This is the first version to support full 16:9, and because of this simple fact, it's the objectively best looking of the three. However, I still slightly prefer the Dreamcast and Gamecube visuals because the lower resolutions were better at hiding the imperfections. SA2 on 7th gen systems is a straight porting job of the Gamecube version, only with even worse lighting. On the PC port I recorded footage from, there's also a bug that completely lights up levels in like Iron Gate or Lost Colony, which is a real immersion breaker. It's still a nice looking game in HD, but I really wish Sonic Team could have put more effort in to improve the visuals. Thankfully, it makes up for this for having the quickest loading times of all three versions. I'm serious, have a look. Yeah, that's quite the difference, isn't it? And that's really it. Overall, Sonic Adventure 2 features very nice looking visuals, especially for its time. I'd actually say it's the best looking game from 2001, beating out titles such as Slanova 2, Lunatea's Vale, Luigi's Mansion, and even Halo Combat Evolved, and it's one of my favorite looking 6th gen games, and it's from early on in the generation. I don't know about you, but I find that rather impressive. With that said, it's time to talk about the soundtrack of SA2. Believe me, this is something I've been itching to talk about since I started doing game reviews, because SA2 features one of, if not the best video game soundtrack I've ever heard. Jun Sonoe and Crush 40 returned from SA1, along with vocalists Tony Harnell and Ted Poley, among others. Like SA1, rock and roll is the primary music genre here. I, for one, absolutely love rock music and intense guitar riffs, and the music of SA2 perfectly breaches that threshold. I don't think there's a single slouch in this entire OST, apart from the GameCube and HD version of the Chow World lobby theme. Other than that, every single song is catchy, memorable, and perfectly fits whatever scenario it plays in. And while yes, the music is primarily rock and roll, SA2 still features a respectable genre variety, all things considered. In addition to the standard rock, there's rap, jazz, techno, and a few others. Some songs are even new and improved versions of tracks from the previous game. I simply have way too many standout tracks to list here, so why not listen to a few highlights instead? Damn, that's some good stuff right there. There's also a fair share of vocal tracks like the last game, again by Crush 40. I'd say that this game's version of It Doesn't Matter and its main theme, Live and Learn, are some of the band's best work. What more can I say? The soundtrack of SA2 is simply phenomenal. With all of the plot and aesthetic details discussed, it's finally time to move on to the most important part of a video game, the gameplay. About time, huh? It's time to ask the most important questions to be asked regarding any video game. Is the gameplay good? You can have the most compelling narrative in the world, the most gorgeous visuals, and the greatest soundtrack ever composed, but if the gameplay isn't any good, then it's not worth a damn. Sure, some genres and subgenres of games have this aspect weighted differently, but generally gameplay is the make or break of video games. So the time has come to pose the question, is the gameplay of Sonic Adventure 2 good? My answer is a resounding yes. Now, like I said, I'm not going to sit here and tell you SA2 is perfect, because it's not, but I'd be damned if I didn't say that it's incredible. I'd argue that it's the absolute peak of the Sonic franchise, and is yet to be topped to this day. So, what compels me to think this way? It's time to get into that, starting with a quick overview. In general, Sonic Adventure 2 follows the same gameplay from its predecessor. It's a relatively linear 3D platformer where you run, jump, and fight enemies in order to clear all 30 action stages. Like the first adventure game, it also features 6 playable characters, but unlike SA1, SA2 only retains 3 of the 6 playstyles. Instead of playing as each character in their own campaign like last time, Sonic Adventure 2 combines the 3 playstyles into 2 separate campaigns, the Hero Story and the Dark Story, in which you'll rotate between them as you progress. The hub worlds have also been removed, making it so you go from stage to stage, just like the classics. Truthfully, I much prefer this for Sonic, since it avoids the needless padding of the hubs from last time around. The consistent switching between characters also leads to a much less repetitive game in general, since you won't be spending an entire hour playing as the same character. In addition, the characters each get their own stages that really bring out the best of their abilities. In the previous game, the designers more or less attempted to replicate the Sonic 3 and Knuckles dynamic of each character sharing the same levels, just with different abilities, with mixed results. While there were some differences between each character's stage design, SA1 was criminally lacking in depth for most of the playstyles because of how the stages were designed. Most were made for Sonic first and foremost, so you could often cheese sections of the stages as, say, Tails or Knuckles, making a lot of the campaigns come off as filler. Not every single one was like this, but most were. Thankfully, SA2 says screw you to this flawed design mentality, and makes it so the levels you go through are designed around the abilities of the character you're playing as. This leads to a much more fleshed out game overall, with far more entertaining levels and gameplay across the board. Before I begin discussing each gameplay style in more depth though, I want to address a popular criticism of not only SA2, but games with alternate playstyles as a whole. In the past decade, it's become increasingly commonplace for many people to crack down on alternate playstyles, claiming that any game that attempts to have them is doomed from the start to become some kind of unfocused mess. This argument has, of course, been applied to the Sonic Adventure games, and for whatever reason, SA2 seems to be the one of the two to get more scorn in this regard. While I do think that there was a point where too many gameplay styles or mechanics combined can lead to an overall messy game, I would argue that Sonic Adventure 2 does not fall into this category. In fact, I'd say it's one of the few games I've played to pull off alternate gameplay styles in a constructive way that really adds to the game, and I genuinely believe that removing said playstyles would ultimately make the game worse off. No, I'm not kidding. This is my genuine, sincere opinion. I can't help but question the claim that SA2 is some Wrath of Cortex-esque mishmash of random ideas that don't gel together. And to the people who do claim this, I wonder if we're playing the same damn game. If you ask me, I think this criticism is much more applicable to the SA1. Now, I'm not saying these people's perspectives are illegitimate or that SA2 doesn't have some aspects I personally think could have been improved, but all of these complaints seem to stem from people being offended by the playstyles in concept rather than execution. For me, as long as the gameplay styles contain the central appeal of the franchise or genre in question, in this case that would be speed and platforming, and are of course fun in their own right, then I have no problem if they change up the stage structure or include a few mechanical differences. With that rant out of the way, let's dive into the gameplay styles proper and explain in no uncertain terms why I enjoy them as much as I do. To start, let's talk about the first gameplay style introduced, the action speed stages starring Sonic and Shadow. These levels follow the same general gameplay from the Sonic campaign of the last game. The goal is simply to make it to the end of the stage, all the while platforming, pulling off tricks, defeating enemies, and collecting rings. The controls for this playstyle are incredibly satisfying, easily some of the best controls in a 3D platformer. Great control is incredibly important to me, and if your game doesn't have that, well, that's not exactly a good thing, to be put it nicely. Thankfully, SA2 absolutely nails the control. Sonic and Shadow handle pretty much the same as Sonic did in Adventure 1, if not somewhat better, which is good because Sonic also handled incredibly well there. I will admit, it did feel a little sensitive the first time I played these levels, but I immediately got used to it. The Hedgehog's acceleration is quick, but not too quick, the turning is precise, but not overly sensitive, and the jumps achieve the perfect balance of floatiness and weight. In addition, there's plenty of orgasmic swoosh noises like in Super Mario Sunshine, which adds to the satisfaction of the controls. This is one of those cases where the simple act of running and jumping around is satisfying in itself. In addition to the standard moveset, Sonic's abilities from the last game all return, including the spin dash alongside a new somersault move which is used to destroy crates and pass under small gaps. This is also the first Sonic game to include rail grinding, which would go on to become a staple of the series. Along with these moves, the upgrades from last time return as well, including the lightspeed dash, and there's even some new ones, such as the bounce bracelet. All of these moves help maintain the sense of flow and speed that is essential to a fun Sonic gameplay style. Rail grinding is especially enjoyable and enhances the pace of already well-paced levels. And can I just say that I absolutely love the Speed Shoes power-up? I mean, just take a look at this.
Here we go!
Holy crap, the insane speed, that kick and guitar music, it's just incredible. Unfortunately, for as great as it is, the control still does have a few minor blemishes, primarily concerning a few button mapping snafus. For one, the spin dash was slightly nerfed this time around. Whereas last time you could mash the action button to send Sonic flying at incredible speeds, which was incredibly enjoyable to do, this time it's closer to how it worked in the classics. You have to stop moving and charge it up briefly before you can use it. This isn't too big of a deal since all you have to do is hold down the button instead of some arbitrary button combo that first timers might miss and can be occasionally clunky to pull off, and it's still fun to use throughout all these stages. A much more significant complaint I have with the moveset is in regards to something I and some others like to refer to as same button syndrome. For those who don't know what that means, same button syndrome is when a game has multiple actions mapped to the same button or combination of buttons, which can lead to performing unintended actions. SA2 speed stages unfortunately have this. The spin dash, somersault, lightspeed dash, bounce bracelet, speeding up on rails, and flipping switches are all mapped to the same button, which can lead to accidentally performing the wrong move or occasionally accidental deaths. The places where this becomes the most prevalent are Crazy Gadget's switches and Final Rush's rails, where you can sometimes accidentally perform a somersault when you didn't want to. If I had to offer a solution for this, I would say the lightspeed dash should be mapped to the B button exclusively, and the spin dash and somersault should remain on the X button. Crouching to speed up on rails should be done with B, since that would only be for lightspeed dashing, and there's never an instance where those two mechanics are used together. Then you should map flipping the switches to the Y buttons, as is that button is never used for anything in the speed stages. If they had done this, then I think this issue would have more or less been solved. As is, it doesn't ruin the playstyle, but I really would like if it had been ironed out. As for the level design of these stages itself, it's pretty airtight, and it contains everything I'm looking for in a Sonic game and then some. It's fast-paced, contains plenty of fun platforming, and all of its challenge comes from the right places. I would argue it's much better designed than the original Sonic Adventure. Whereas that game was also solidly designed, the fact that the stages had to be balanced to accommodate 6 different characters led to some areas feeling forced for Sonic to pass through, even shoehorn in if you will. By contrast, since SA2's speed levels are made from the ground up for Sonic and Shadow alone, they're far more in-depth and offer set pieces that bring out said depth. With that said though, I do have to address a popular criticism regarding these levels. This criticism seems to be made much less nowadays, but still shows up from time to time. Many people like to complain that the levels Sonic and Shadow go through are much more linear than SA1's, offering less exploration value, and that this is supposedly a reason they dislike them. To me, this is quite frankly a gargantuan hunk of grade A bullshit. If you look at both level sets from the adventure games, you'll see that they're both relatively linear. Even then, this in itself isn't necessarily a bad thing, since you're still platforming and there's still plenty of interesting set pieces. Furthermore, SA2's levels aren't completely lacking in exploration value. Several stages have branching paths, namely Final Rush, and there's even multiple hidden ring boxes and other items to find. And that's not to mention the fact that coming back with new abilities opens up more paths and secrets to discover. However, not every single speed stage is a masterpiece. There is one that sticks out from the rest, Shadow's last level, Final Chase. This level follows Shadow as he platforms across gravity-based cylinders. Yeah, gravity mechanics in a 3D platformer 6 whole years before Super Mario Galaxy. Isn't that something? Anyways, these cylinders can be a little janky, and the enemy placement sometimes doesn't work the best for the set piece. I swear, it's even worse on Gamecube and PC, where the cylinders are even more finicky than the original version. I'm willing to admit that Final Chase is the absolute worst speed stage, but the remaining 9 levels are perfectly fine. Even then, Final Chase is still a far cry from the utterly revolting, sickeningly garbage level design of the Crash Bandicoot trilogy, so that's also a plus, even if that's not saying much, but I digress. Anyways, that really does it for the speed stages. Overall, they're my favorite playstyle in the game, and probably my favorite gameplay style in the entire Sonic series. They take the already great foundation of SA1's Sonic campaign and improve upon it tenfold, with far more focused and fleshed out level design, making for an incredibly enjoyable experience. Now it's time to discuss the second gameplay style, the mech shooting stages with Tails and Eggman. These levels are very similar to E102 Gamma from the last game. Tails and Eggman pilot the Tornado 3 and Egg Walker respectively, and it's your job to guide them to the end of the level while shooting down enemies and other staged elements. The most popular criticism of these stages tends to be the notion that the mech's control is apparently clunky, and the people that will argue this claim that Gamma supposedly controlled better. And once again, I must disagree. Don't get me wrong, the mech stages definitely have the weakest control of the three main playstyles, but that doesn't mean they handle poorly. Personally, I find the mech control to be way better than Gamma. Gamma was overly slippery and his jumps could lack momentum. The mechs in this game, on the other hand, are much easier to handle. They're not nearly as slippery, floaty, and imprecise as Gamma was, so it's a hell of a lot more fun to platform, lock onto enemies, and simply play through those stages. Some people also like to claim that these levels are slower than Gamma's, but that's simply not true. When given the chance, the mechs are more than capable of running at a high speed, which plays incredibly well into the appeal of the series. The level design is also far better than that of Gamma. Gamma's levels were far too easy, lacking any challenge. The only thing that came close to the word challenging in those stages was the timer, which you had to lock onto enemies to increase, but there were still plenty of enemies around to fill it up, and said enemies never put up a fight. By contrast, SA2's mech levels feature decently challenging platforming and combat set pieces, and locking on and blowing the fuck out of enemies and stage hazards is rewarding, satisfying, and enjoyable as all hell. The lock-on also gives the player agency instead of being completely automated like a Mega Man X7, and actually requires some skill and finesse to use. I do prefer the Gamecube's lock-on, where the strength and speed have been jacked up to make the stages flow a little better, but even on Dreamcast the lock-on is perfectly functional. Instead of a timer, you lock onto enemies to rack up points for the A rank, which is a much more worthwhile incentive. More on that later. I don't know what to say, platforming with the hover upgrade and locking onto enemies to achieve a perfect combo of 11 is a fun time and I can't get enough of it. Another criticism of this playstyle, and to a greater extent the whole game, commonly receives is the camera control and enemy placement. While I agree with there's moments that both of these things could be improved, this is certainly not a game-ruining issue, and the camera is far better than last time around. Just like Adventure 1 in the Spyro trilogy, you move the camera by pressing L and R to rotate it left and right respectively. The Dreamcast never had an official controller with a second analog stick, so I'd say this camera system is perfectly acceptable. I'm also not bothered that the Gamecube version keeps this camera control even though its controller had a second analog stick, since the camera itself works fine. The straightforward design of the levels also means that the camera is always facing where you need it to. In addition, the enemy placement works just fine with the camera system for the most part, and there's only a few instances where I think it could be better. Hell, the digital version even adds the right stick support, even if the camera is somehow slightly worse in certain areas, and it still is an analog like Mario Sunshine, so this addition is a bit of a false positive, but never mind. Oh yeah, and let's not forget that the highly revered classics struggled with this issue as well. They often featured poor enemy placement combined with Sonic being locked in the dead center of the screen, which could lead to slamming into stage hazards that are hard to predict. Even in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, where this problem was more or less fixed, it could still happen on occasion. Adventure 1 also wasn't the best in this regard, and the camera there would often get stuck on stage geometry and give you poor angles to work with. This isn't an issue exclusive to Sonic games too, mind you. Pretty much every game from this era, even the best ones, had flawed camera systems. In general, I don't find the camera or enemy placement in SA2 to be nearly as bad as many will claim it is. I feel as though this criticism has been greatly exaggerated. However, this playstyle still isn't perfect. I have one personal gripe with it concerning combos. Overall, the lock-on works quite well, but if you take a hit while chaining together a combo or even right after setting one off, you won't get the points for said combo. You could chain together a perfect 11 combo, but then something will hit you and you'll lose out on the 2,000 points. This doesn't happen often, but it can be mildly grating when it does, especially when going for A ranks. My proposed fix for this one is obvious. Make it so getting hit by enemies doesn't cancel the points from an already executed combo. I'm fine if getting hit before setting it off makes you lose the combo, but I would prefer if after I let go of the action button, I'm guaranteed to earn the points, no matter what. Wouldn't you agree? I'm not saying you have to, but it's just a rhetorical question, you know? Regardless of that, I still find the mech stages to be a great time. I love third-person platformer shooter type gameplay, for example, Ratchet & Clank, and these stages offer a similar kind of appeal to me. In addition to that, they have speedy platforming-centric gameplay that gels well with the appeal of Sonic. Yes, the type of platforming and combat's changed, but you're still running and jumping at a reasonable speed like you should in any Sonic game, so I consider them a worthwhile, meaningful, and constructive extension of the core gameplay. In addition to the mech stages, one of Tails' 10 levels is a go-kart level. Rouge the Bat also has one of these, where she drives a vehicle with a very specific shape. In these two brief stages, you drive to the end of the level while racing through gates that increase the timer at the top left. The one thing that's strange about these levels is the button mapping of the handbrake. You have to let go of the A button and quickly tap and hold it again, which lets you turn much tighter. Personally, I would have mapped it how most other driving games do, with the accelerator being on the A button and drifting on the Y button, so you could hold it down when you wanted to turn, but as is, Well, it works, it's just kind of weird. These two levels are enjoyable, but have no platforming, so I consider them more of a brief break from the core gameplay than anything else. Sort of easy breather levels, kind of like the Sky Chase subgame from Adventure 1. Except way better paced and not nearly as boring. And that's really all there is to say about these two levels. You all know what's next. Let's get right into it. And last but certainly not least, we have the third gameplay style of Sonic Adventure 2, the treasure hunting, starring Knuckles the Echidna and Rouge the Bad. This gameplay style is easily the most complex in the entire game, and is the most divisive playstyle in an already divisive game. Some people absolutely love it, some disagree entirely. As for me, I really like these stages. Yeah, you heard me right. I, Diamond Miner Studios, enjoy the treasure hunting stages in Sonic Adventure 2. I wouldn't call this my favorite gameplay style, and these levels are probably the weakest in the game, but I still get a lot of fun from them. In these levels, you'll take control of Knuckles and Rouge as you glide and platform through 9 levels. Instead of reaching the end of a straightforward romp, however, each level is open-ended and emphasizes exploration as you look for 3 Master Emerald shards, keys, or what have you, hence the name treasure hunting. To assist you, you have a radar and a fully blown hint system which help you keep track of all 3 treasures. In essence, this is a refined version of the same gameplay style from SA1, just like the other 2 playstyles in SA2. And that brings us to the 2 major complaints that arise regarding these levels. First, the radar. In SA1, the radar in the Knuckles levels would track all 3 pieces at once, whereas here it only locates 1 at a time. This may seem like a cheap way of lengthening the levels, but, and I'm going to sound like an absolute madman here, I think I actually prefer the way the radar is here. I know, I have to be some crazy, lunatic, contrarian cuckold to claim such a thing, but that's genuinely what I think. In Sonic Adventure, the radar beeping for all 3 pieces at once absolutely destroyed any depth the stages could have had. This is in addition to the hint system there, in which Tikal told you exactly where to go and defeated the point of the playstyle. That is, exploration. You know, the thing that many people praise the classics for? Good God. Regardless, I would argue that this radar change is simply a side effect of a much improved hint system. Like I said, in SA1, the hints that Tikal gave you told you exactly where to go. Here, there. Actual hints that allow you to do the detective work and don't hold your hand like you're a toddler? What a concept, right? I'm having a lot of fun with this, can you tell? Like I was saying, this new hint system is much more conducive to exploration. It allows for a much greater amount of depth to these levels, and since you actually have to put in the work to finish each one, I don't know about you, but I find this much more enjoyable than the laughable crap from last time. Some people claim that these hints are useless because they lower your rank, but I'd like to call bullshit on this one. These hints do subtract a few points you get from collecting the emerald pieces, but they do not decrease your rank if you use them effectively. These hints are essential to everything about this gameplay style, and if you choose not to use them, that's your own damn fault, not the game's. I'm sorry if I'm coming off as a bit angry or fed up here, but I'm sick and tired of hearing these constant complaints that these stages are apparently too long, from people that avoid using the hints for one BS reason or another. It would be like trying to play Ratchet & Clank without using guns or something. Yeah, it's possible to beat it this way, but you'll have a much better time using the mechanics like you're supposed to. Generally, the levels can be cleared in around 1 to 4 minutes, with 5 or 6 being the absolute upper limit. As long as you're using hints, the level shouldn't take much longer than that, even with the randomly chosen locations of the pieces. What matters much more is your clear time, not so much the amount of points you from each piece, since you'll naturally get more points if you're finding the pieces quickly. Sure, the hints aren't always the most helpful thing in the world, but there's something. If I'm being honest, it seems like the only reason many people prefer the SA1 stages is because they're easier and require less effort. I like to ask one question. Since when is it bad design to require some effort from the player? To me, as long as something is well designed, I have no problem with said thing requiring a fair amount of effort to complete, and SA2's treasure hunting perfectly fits this bill for me. Also, for the love of God, someone needs to explain to me why so many shitty 2D games, particularly from the NES, are more or less given a free pass by some people, when many of them rely on bullshit tricks for their quote-unquote challenge, but SA2 is the one that gets all the heat despite its far better design. At least in my opinion. However, that discussion is part of a whole other can of worms I'd rather not get into. Rant over, let's get back on track. What helps with the enjoyability of these levels is the control of Knuckles and Rouge. They handle about the same as Sonic and Shadow, meaning everything I praise about their control carries over here, including the well-balanced speed and acceleration. In addition, they feature an incredibly satisfying glide ability, which feels way better than the slightly more heavy and awkward control of Knuckles from SA1. Because of this glide, Knuckles and Rouge may just be the best controlling characters in the game, to be honest. They're simply a joy to play as, and this only enhances the amount of enjoyment I get from platforming and exploring these levels. Speaking of the levels themselves, they're actually pretty well designed overall. Like I mentioned, they're all open-ended. They're fairly similar in design to some collectathon levels, come to think of it, which I consider a good thing. Super Mario Sunshine is my favorite platformer period, and Super Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie, and the Spyro trilogy, among many others, aren't far behind. I love the collectathon subgenre, and these levels fit a similar kind of appeal to me. Some people claim that these levels are too big. There's certainly a kernel of truth to this claim, but I would still say I disagree. Only 4 of the levels, Pumpkin Hill, Death Chamber, Meteor Herd, and Mad Space, feel significantly bigger than those of SA1. Other than that, the remaining 5 stages are no bigger than those of the last game, and even then, the ones that are bigger still feature identifiable set pieces or locations, so it's nearly impossible to get lost in these levels. In addition, the radar and hint systems are there to guide you in the right direction. The only treasure hunting level I don't care for is Death Chamber. This is the one level where the criticisms people have manifest. It's a labyrinthine maze of hallways that can be difficult to navigate, and the radar doesn't work nearly as well with this fact. You also have to stop in place and hit hourglasses to open the doors, which is a real pace breaker. Still, Death Chamber is the worst the treasure hunting gameplay ever gets. Other than that level, each one is perfectly fine, if a little big on occasion. Yes, even Mad Space. And yes, I did just say that. Still, there is one thing I think could have been improved. While I disagree that the radar tracking one piece at a time ruins the playstyle, the number of detection states still could have used some improvement. What do I mean by this? Well, in SA1, the radar was more sensitive than in SA2. There it would beep with 6 colors: blue, green, yellow, pink, and then red. In SA2, this has been shortened down to just green, yellow, and red. With this much shorter range of detection, it can be a little more annoying to gauge the exact distance you are from an emerald piece, which is only exacerbated by the smaller and less noticeable models for the collectibles. The fix for this one is, like the mech shooting combo point I made, quite simple. Keep the sensitivity of the radar from SA1 and make the emerald pieces easier to spot. The Gamecube version makes a step in the right direction and adds an exclamation point to help you locate buried collectibles. This is a good addition, but I still would have liked the sensitivity from SA1. Regardless, I still find the treasure hunting levels to be enjoyable no matter what version of the game I'm playing. They're well paced, have plenty of platforming, feature genuinely fun and enjoyable exploration-centric collectathon type gameplay, and gel well with the other 2 gameplay styles because of their emphasis on platforming and speed, which enhances this exploration. Next, why not talk about the bosses? As per usual for platformers, Sonic Adventure 2 has a fair share of boss fights. I don't have that much to say about these, so I'll keep this brief. In general, these bosses are far better than the ones from Adventure 1. The bosses here actually put up a reasonable fight, having much more in-depth attack patterns than the laughable trash from SA1. Because of this, bosses in SA2 are much better justified, but even then, they're still not very difficult. While more challenging than those of the last game, the bosses in this game are still relatively simple. Even with that, a handful of fights can be mildly annoying. For instance, the second Eggman vs Tails fight feels somewhat luck-based. Sometimes you'll steamroll your opponent, other times you'll get your ass kicked. And the first Bio-Lizard fight is kinda long and tedious. I especially hated the latter on my first playthrough, and while I enjoy it increasingly every time I play the game, it's still my least favorite boss from the whole adventure. Several of the bosses are also repeated in the Hero and Dark stories. This fact is much less pronounced than it was in SA1, but it can still lead to a bit of repetitiveness here and there. And that's really it for the bosses. Yeah, told you it wouldn't take that long. With that said, we're still not done yet. There's one more thing I have to touch on before discussing the last story and the ending. Sonic Adventure 2 is the first game in the series to include a ranking system. I've hinted at this system throughout the review and I've talked about it a little bit here and there, but now it's time to talk about it in full. Unlike previous Sonic games, which had no real purpose to the score tally at the end of the stage, SA2 actually makes that tally worth a damn by awarding you a rank based on the amount of points you get, ranging from E, the lowest, to A, the highest. In order to earn points, you have to do various things. For example, pulling off tricks in the speed stages, racking up combos in the mech stages, and finding the emerald pieces quickly in the hunting stages. The ranks in the cart levels are entirely based on clear time. You also have to clear the levels without dying, since doing so resets your score to 0. Personally, I really enjoy going after the A ranks. I was more ambivalent towards this system on my first playthrough, but after playing the game, quite frankly a scary amount of times, I've come to really appreciate the system. Now the ranking system is entirely optional, just like the special stages in the classics, so you're never required to go after any ranks. I'm also aware that not everyone will have the drive to get to the point I'm at with the ranks. However, I generally enjoy chasing them in spite, and find that they add a worthwhile incentive to master the game and learn the ins and outs of its level design. They're a genuinely fun extra challenge that enhances each level. You're also given a convenient restart option from the pause menu, which completely eliminates the frustration of barely losing out on the A rank and having to select the stage from the menu to play it again. This feature can also come in handy if you get really unlucky in the treasure hunting levels. All in all, I consider this ranking system a positive addition, though I do understand those who either don't care about it or get annoyed or frustrated from getting a poor rank when they're focusing on playing the game casually. Just add an option in the menu to turn off the ranks at the end of levels, and I'd say you've satisfied pretty much everyone.
Just kidding, bitches.
Yeah, there's actually one more thing I gotta talk about before we move on to the last story. That is the optional content, which there is quite a bit of. First, the optional missions. Every level of the game has 4 of these missions each, and the objectives range from collecting 100 rings to finding a lost Chow. I'll be honest, I personally don't bother with these missions, kind of like SDX's mission mode, so I can't really offer an in-depth take on them. I'm not one to go for 100% completion unless the game as a whole is a collectathon anyways, and SA2 is no exception, but I'm sure there's a completionist out there that will have a field day with these missions. In addition, there's a multiplayer mode which lets you play action races, treasure hunting, or mech battles against a second person. I don't usually play this since I'm a lonely sack of shite and have no one to play it with, although I'm sure it will be something enjoyable to the right person. The only thing to comment on is the differences between the Dreamcast and Gamecube multiplayer. The Gamecube version has more characters and stages unlocked from the start, whereas on Dreamcast you had to grind for A ranks to unlock characters. The frame rate also sucked on Dreamcast and multiplayer, so that's also a thing. Even without having played it, I can tell the Gamecube's multiplayer is better based off of this information. In addition, there's also the Chow Garden, which is sort of a virtual pet simulator. You have to collect Chow keys as any character to open the garden, and then you need to play the stages to collect chaos drives and small animals to grow your Chow. To be honest, however, I don't have the motivation or interest necessary to care about the Chow Garden. Personally, it's just not something for me. I can see the appeal of this place. I mean, I played my fair share of so-called do-whatever-you-want type of games. Minecraft is one of my favorite games of all time, as are Roller Coaster Tycoon 3 and Planet Coaster, and I even thought Animal Crossing New Horizons was fairly decent for the time I played it. I can see why people enjoy the Chow Garden, but when I play SA2, I'd rather play the actual game. Though Eggman in the Chow Garden is really hilarious. Oh yeah, and there's also this.
Welcome to Chow World!
Rolling around at the speed of
Yosh!
got places to go, gotta follow my
Yosh!
Also, anyone who says that the Chow Garden is the only good part of SA2 is making up bullshit. To be quite frank, that is one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. I mean, come on. How could anyone make such a claim that's so fucking stupid? But at this point, I'm rambling on. And it's finally time to talk about the last story segment, unlocked after completing both the Hero and Dark campaigns. This segment serves as the ultimate conclusion to the narrative as a whole and the final hurrah for all the playable characters. The segment opens up immediately following the ending of the main campaigns. After inserting the 7 Chaos Emeralds into the Eclipse cannon, Eggman inadvertently triggers a Doomsday Protocol on the Space Colony Ark. He immediately gets a pre-recorded video feed from his grandfather Gerald Robotnik, in which he announces his plan to get revenge on the world for causing the death of his granddaughter Maria. Suddenly, the Space Colony Ark pulls a Mobile Suit Gundam and begins a crash course down to the Earth below. In approximately 27 minutes, the colony is set to impact the planet, wiping out every living creature. As this happens, the video feed of Gerald plays on the planet below, bringing the entire world to a standstill. Meanwhile, Eggman meets up with the main characters in the capsule room and plays an entry from his grandfather's diary. It's revealed here that Shadow was a creation of the mad scientist, who then planted fake memories of Maria's death to manipulate him into destroying the world should he be awakened. Now this plan has come to fruition, and the Earth is in danger of total annihilation within the next half hour. These cutscenes establish a looming threat of the apocalypse throughout the entirety of the last story segment, and effectively create a sense of tension and urgency throughout. This is only enhanced by the terrifying, raspy voice of Gerald and his creepy appearance, along with the tense music and visuals. Have a look.
I found Maria's name among those who died when the Ark was shut down. She meant everything to me, and I couldn't bear the thought that she died because of my research. I lost everything. I had nothing more to live for. I went insane. All I could think about was to avenge her. Somehow, some way. I got scared as I no longer was able to control my thoughts.
Anyway, the characters put aside their differences for the greater good of humanity. They team up to stop the energy of the Chaos Emeralds, which is now moving towards the core of the Eclipse Cannon. They barely have any time left, which furthers the sense of urgency in completing this goal. Thus begins the final stage, the aptly named Canon Score. This level features a few of the last appearances for the playable characters, and you play as 5 out of the 6 of them. You'll start out as Tails, then go to Eggman, then Rouge, then Knuckles, and finally Sonic. In general, I enjoy this level, but it's not without its flaws. For one, Tails' and Eggman's sections are pretty much the same. Secondly, Knuckles' section can be annoying if you don't know about the hidden air necklace upgrade found in Aquatic Mine. It can also go on for a little bit too long, although it probably only feels so long since you switch between 5 separate characters. Even with these flaws, however, I still enjoy this level, and it's one of the most enjoyable to A rank. This is the only level where dying doesn't necessarily mean restarting for the rank, so long as you can get past the Tails and Eggman sections with a reasonable amount of points and without dying after hitting a checkpoint. This is because your points from previous characters don't get erased after dying, so if you accidentally fall into a bottomless pit as Sonic or get hit without rings as Knuckles, you don't have to restart the stage to get an A rank. Following this level, Amy Rose is seen entering the Ark's lab, where she finds Shadow sitting alone looking down at Earth. She takes it upon herself to approach him and get him to help. Shadow, still under the belief that Maria wanted him to do this, sees no reason to help them. Amy tells him to help because people make mistakes, but deserve a chance to be happy regardless. Or at least that's what she says in the original Japanese script. Yeah, this scene was kinda ruined by the English translation, where she just says, people are good. Regardless of that, this gives Shadow another flashback of Maria, in which she tells him her true intention: to work with humanity for a better future despite what they were doing to her. Shadow, taken aback, realizes what he's done was not what she wanted all along, and sheds a tear upon this realization. Now determined to fulfill Maria's wish, Shadow immediately takes off to help the heroes stop the colony with a running animation that never fails to give me a good laugh. After this, Sonic and Knuckles charge forward to the deepest part of the cannon, which bizarrely has a replica of the Master Emerald Shrine from Angel Island. Yeah, Professor Gerald visited Angel Island at some point during his research, and he was the creator of the Eclipse Cannon. The two run for it to stop the emeralds, but are immediately stopped by the final guardian of the shrine, the gigantic prototype of the ultimate life form, the Bio-Lizard.
This be the prototype of the ultimate life form that was supposed to be encapsulated?
Yeah, so apparently the ultimate life form project went from a huge lizard to a human-sized hedgehog. Strange, but regardless, Shadow then appears to help out Sonic and Knuckles. He manages the Bio-Lizard as the two run for the shrine. After a long and somewhat tedious boss battle, Sonic and Knuckles finally reach the capsule with Shadow trailing behind. Knuckles says the same prayer Tikal did in SA1 and begs the Master Emerald to stop the Chaos Emeralds. It begins spinning and emitting an intense light, and the colony is slows to a stop. However, the unthinkable then happens. The Bio-Lizard lets out a panicked roar and suddenly performs Chaos Control. Yes, this big, gigantic beast pulls off Chaos Control. Turns out it has an organ within its body that makes it capable of doing so. The lizard is now fused with the colony, which really means he shoved it up his ass. And now the colony is once again on a collision course with the Earth. Eggman announces this over a loudspeaker, which I swear the degree of delay in the echo is randomized in each playthrough.
Still alive, and he's controlling this place to work. He's become one with the space colony, and is determined to keep it on its collision course.
After learning of this, Sonic and Shadow exchange glances, and the two hedgehogs mutually understand what they have to do. They use the Chaos Emeralds to transform into their super forms and, okay. They change into Super Sonic and Super Shadow. And I love this scene. Ignoring the, very specific animation, this scene represents the character progression of Shadow and his relationship with Sonic. If you remember back to the beginning of the game, Sonic and Shadow were bitter enemies and consistently clashed and butt heads, but over the course of the game, the two have built up a mutual respect for one another and are now prepared to save the world together. The two hedgehogs depart from Knuckles and fly out to the front of the colony to stop the Bio-Lizard before it collides with the planet. Final boss time. The final boss fight takes place outside of the colony, at the tip of the Eclipse Cannon. You have to fly around as Super Sonic and Shadow, avoiding lasers and eggs from the Bio-Lizard, while hitting the purple bulges that appear on the beast's body. These are ulcers from the absence of life support that made the lizard invincible, and are the only weak spots on it. As usual for Super Sonic bosses, you have a limited amount of rings, and the fight has an overall 5-minute time limit, so you're required to play it quickly. If you're about to run out of rings, you're able to fly over or under the Bio-Lizard to switch to the other character, who will have more rings. My only issue with this fight is that the laser's patterns can seem a little randomized across playthroughs. Sometimes it will give almost no resistance, and other times it will consistently block you. Other than that, I find this to be a challenging, adrenaline-pumping boss fight that serves as a perfect climax to of the game. The aesthetics only enhance this fight. The gradually reddening screen as the colony approaches the planet, the circle of fire that appears around the Biolizard's head, everything about this really creates a climactic feeling. And of course, I'd be damned if I didn't mention the music. Live and Learn, the game's main theme. You've heard snippets and hints towards it throughout the game, and now it's proudly blasting in the background in its full glory. Hot damn, that's some good stuff. This entire fight really feels like the perfect climax to an already incredible build-up. It's the payoff to what the entire game has been foreshadowing and building up to, and it's absolutely incredible. Immediately after they finish off the Biolizard, the colony continues its freefall to Earth, now engulfed in the flames of re-entry. Sonic and Shadow prepare to stop it with one final measure, a large-scale chaos control. This cutscene is very tense. The music, the visuals, the dialogue, all of it really sells the fact that these are the last moments before total annihilation of Earth and all humanity, and that one wrong move or mistimed action from Sonic or Shadow is the difference between life and death for the planet. The two then pull off a gigantic chaos control and manage to teleport the colony back to a stable orbit, saving everyone. Shadow, having overexerted himself, falls to Earth. He has made the ultimate heroic sacrifice to save the human race, and has fulfilled his promise to Maria. All around the world, people celebrate their lives having been saved. Sonic makes his way back to the now stabilized colony, and meets up with Tails, Knuckles, Amy, Rouge, and Eggman. Rouge asks where Shadow is, and Sonic informs them of his sacrifice. What follows is an incredibly emotional scene where the characters reflect on their journey. This cutscene is simply phenomenal, and the perfect ending to an incredible game. The melancholy music, the characters' dialogue, everything about this scene is pure perfection. After it's done with, the characters all go home, and the final shot of Sonic has him give one last farewell to Shadow. This shot is the icing on the cake of everything SA2 accomplishes.
Sayonara, Shadow the Hedgehog.
Simply amazing. This is easily my favorite ending in video game history, and considering many of the endings I've seen, that is saying a lot. Yeah, I'll admit it. I actually cried my damn eyes out the first time I saw this scene. Hell, I'm on the verge of tears writing this goddamn script, and trust me, it takes a hell of a lot for a piece of media to make me cry. That's how powerful I find this scene to be. It's the perfect conclusion, the cherry on top of this video game masterpiece. In the end, I don't know what more I can say about Sonic Adventure 2 than I haven't already. If you can't tell by now, I absolutely love this game more than mere words can describe. Sonic Team really outdid themselves for this one, and it feels like a fitting end to not only Sega's time as a console manufacturer, but as an end of an era for the Sonic series as a whole. The graphics are really nice for the early 6th generation, and the game still looks great to this day. The music is absolutely amazing, featuring not only some of the best video game music I've heard, but some of my favorite music, period. The game takes 3 of the best gameplay styles from the first Sonic Adventure, cutting the ones that didn't work, and improving and streamlining the ones that do return. The controls for all playstyles are absolutely perfect, and their level design brings out far more depth than the previous game did. The game is also one of the few I've seen to pull off alternate gameplay styles in the ideal way. All of them feature platforming with some of their own variations, and they synergize incredibly well with one another. Finally, the story features really fun character interactions and dialogue, and despite some dated aspects of the presentation, it's still a really entertaining narrative with a phenomenal ending that actually moved me to tears on my first playthrough. I wholeheartedly believe that this game is, as the title of this video says, an example of a perfect sequel. It fixes and paves over every last issue I had with Adventure 1 and takes everything great about that game, and hell, even the previous games before that, and makes it even greater. That's not to say SA2 is a perfect game, and it isn't. Also, if you still don't agree with me after watching this video, then that's perfectly fine and I respect your opinion. However, that's entirely irrelevant. Any issues I have with SA2 are so minor and don't affect my opinion in the slightest. Sure, Sonic 3 & Knuckles is the lesser flawed game, but as much as I like it, I'm not exactly blown away every time I revisit it. Sonic Adventure 2 is a game that legitimately leaves me excited every time I come back to it, and it simply never gets old. It's short enough that I can replay it in a reasonable amount of time, but long enough to be fulfilling and worthwhile. It's quite possibly the most replayable game I've ever played, to the point that every playthrough blends in with the last four. In fact, you want to know something? For my review of Sonic Adventure, I played the game 3 times and I got sick of it. For this review, on the other hand, I played Sonic Adventure 2 a total of 9 times. 5 of those times I didn't even need the footage, I just think this game is fun to play. In case you can't tell by now, I would absolutely recommend playing SA2, and if you choose to, you have the choice between the Dreamcast, Gamecube, and digital versions. I would recommend the Gamecube and digital versions first and foremost for the quality of life improvements and better extras, but the Dreamcast version is still a perfectly fine way to experience it. All of these things and many more have made it so that Sonic Adventure 2 will forever go down as one of my favorite games of all time. And that does it for my thoughts on Sonic Adventure 2. I hope you enjoyed watching this review, since I sure enjoyed making it. The second I sat down to write this script, I knew this review would be the behemoth that it is, but I wouldn't have it any other way. Regardless, that's the Sonic Adventure series covered, and I still think that these two games are fantastic in their own ways. The first one had some issues, yeah, but both of these games are and always will be, at least to me, one of the best examples of a 3D transition. In any event, it's time to move on. Following Sonic Adventure DX on the Gamecube, the Sonic series would finally travel beyond the boundaries of its Nintendo comfort zone. Sure, SA2 was the first Sonic game released on a console not made by Sega, but it wasn't until the next entry when the series would expand its horizons. To finish up this Dreamcast-era Sonic retrospective, I'll be tackling the first true multi-platform game in the series, Sonic Heroes. It may take me a bit to get to it, and I might even make a few reviews of non-Sonic games in the meanwhile, but rest assured there will be a Heroes review soon. In any event, this has been Diamond Miner Studios, and I'll see you in the next review.
Going to make an announcement. Shadow the Hedgehog is a bitch ass